This is episode 32 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I am so excited to share today's conversation with you. I had the great honor and privilege of interviewing Dr. Cara Barker on her research and book on the world-weary woman. The world-weary woman is a woman who is achievement-oriented and usually successful. She can be described as having type A behaviors and is usually caught up in busyness, feels like she's always behind, is involved in goal-oriented behaviors, pushing forward and feeling prompted to produce. Dr. Barker's research explored how staying busy can be a coping strategy for avoiding emotional pain, and that the anxiety that the world-weary woman experiences is a result of being in constant motion. As I was preparing for this conversation with Dr. Barker, doing my research, looking through her writing, exploring her website, one of the things that stood out for me is that at one time she was a young Army nurse in training in a Vietnam-era Army nursing program. And there she was reminded in her work with seriously injured returning soldiers of the many curveballs life can throw us. During long periods of sitting with patients when they had few words to describe their trauma, Dr. Barker began to sketch the images they described. In these images, they discovered that their depths carried a healing power. Although she knew nothing of the work of Carl Jung at that time, she was impressed at the healing medicine that arises from our own psyche. Some years later, Dr. Barker developed her own meditation practice, which turned out to be the perfect accompaniment for healing imagery. She discovered that we can use the emergent creative power that arrives when we explore our suffering in ways that promote healing. At the time, Dr. Barker did not realize that this would be ground she would need when she lost her own son. She says, "You never know the importance of the seeds you are planting until it is time for harvest." Dr. Barker has come to learn that regardless of where the path has led, nothing is wasted. Every single footstep is necessary to be where you are right now. Every doorway is important if we are to honor the calling of our own heart. It's what makes us who we are. It is not possible to fully capture the depth of Dr. Barker's contributions to our world, but I at least wanted to make an effort. Dr. Barker is a dynamic keynote speaker, master storyteller, author, artist, and Jungian analyst. Her work focuses on what she calls the way of the soul, and has always concerned itself with learning to find and trust the individual's deepest wisdom, as revealed through dreams, physical symptoms, meaningful coincidence or synchronicity, attractions, and creative expressions. Dr. Barker's work for over half a century has been centered on helping thousands of individuals transform their suffering into greater strength. She has done this through her private practice, international retreats, seminars, and workshops. She is the originator of The Way of the Soul, which she teaches here and abroad. She has mentored not only Fortune 500 leaders, but has also worked with children, teens, and adults from all walks of life. She is an adjunct professor at Seattle University and has lectured throughout the United States and internationally on numerous topics, all of which have to do with realigning our lives with that which is deepest and most fulfilling. Trained as an analyst at the Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, Dr. Barker explored the experience of world weariness in highly successful individuals. Her 10-year published study, World-Weary Woman, Her Wound and Transformation, examines the profound experience of trauma and loss upon achievement-driven women. So without any further ado, here is part 1 of our 2-part conversation with Dr. Cara Barker. Welcome to the podcast.
It sounded, listening to it is so weird. It's like, and you don't have to edit that noise because we hear ourselves all the time for being real. Yes. But listening to it is kind of like listening to my obituary, when in fact, it's way too long. And I told my husband, I said, really, my 2 license plates should be on my tombstone. You know, we think of these things more in our 70s and beyond. And one of my license plates says, thank you. And the other one says, love more. So I said, just write on my tombstone, if I bite it before you, thank you, love more, thank you.
Wow.
That's it.
Like if you had to,
that's the sum of my life.
Distill it down, right?
That's a big part of the descent in midlife. And for, I think, the world weary which isn't always, by the way, in midlife. But when we reach that point, where we say, you know, all this pushing and prodding and attending to what everybody else wants us to do, it's not working. I feel out of harmony with myself. And then we have to edit out. It's easy to edit out the things that we don't like in our life. Okay, that's not true. I just lied. It's not necessarily easy, because the things that we may not be too crazy about, in other words, you know, this would be maybe the artist or musician in Seattle, or the performing artist, say, in New York, who truly is called to the expression of their humanity through their art form, but they can't make a living at it. And so maybe they are some sort of an attendant at a restaurant, or washing dishes, or whatever. They do whatever they need to do. What's tricky is letting go of things that we have such a love for. But we no longer have the energy for it. So we have to let go. And it's a dilemma like Solomon's dilemma. How do we choose between which child of the heart we let go of? It's a very, very difficult work. It creates a tension of opposites that's almost unbearable. And that's when we go into our excessive of anything, of drinking or drugging or shopping or gambling or relationship foo or whatever it happens to be. And it's really tough because the pain of it is so hard. The term world weariness, there was a journal, the first journal ever written, was written in Egypt. And it was about the world-weary man in conversation with the Ba, meaning his soul. It was written over 2,000 years before Christ. And it's an amazing document because in that era, there was no belief in the soul. There was no belief in God in whatever form we want to address God or the divine. But this man was at the edge of himself. He was so weary. He was so fatigued. And out of that tremendous tension that he sensed, his life was just not unfolding in the way that it needed to be in terms of being in harmony with himself. There was no appreciation for the self. Yeah. But somehow that tension was so tremendous that it evoked a conversation with this other aspect of his being that today we might call the self or the soul or the Christed consciousness. Different cultures call it different things, but it is, let's just say, it's the best, deepest part of our wisdom self that's at a cellular level. So he wrote in his journal, and it was found by an Egyptologist, and then it was translated by a German, but I came across it. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is what I experienced in the 1980s, which was my dissertation. And my dissertation was about this subject. I didn't name it that, but it was the phenomena, because here's the truth. I was sitting in a colloquium for other doctoral students, and we were elucidating our topic for our research. And I had spent 18 months on my topic, so I would feel confident, you know. And in fact, I had laboratory protocols and everything. I was ready to roll. My presentation was one of the very last of 14 people. And I noticed in my nervousness, but it wasn't my turn yet, so I could observe, I noticed that as every person was getting ready, men and women, to present, they would sit on the edge of their chair and rifle through their papers. And I thought, what the heck's going on? What is that anxiety about? That we start being in motion. It's like, have you ever been in a situation, Lourdes, where you're being asked to speak, but somebody else is speaking before you, and the monkey mind is scrambling for what you're going to say?
Right. You can't concentrate.
So we're not attending the person who's speaking because our anxiety is so high. And I began to question that during the days. It was like seizing me. Like, what is this? And so by the time of my presentation, the night before, I went to my core faculty member, and she said, rap on my door at any time, day of night, if something is. So it was 2 a.m. in the morning, and I knocked on Penny's door, and I said, Penny, I am freaked out. She said, what's happening? I said, I can't get over this phenomenon that I'm seeing in the room in presentation, and that is really my subject. But I have 18 months of preparation, and I am about to shoot myself in the foot. She said, listen, dear, and I'm saying this to you, Lourdes, and anybody who is brave enough to listen to these words, and I hope they catch the experience. She said, you must always go in the direction of your heart calling, no matter what the price. Because your true work in the world will keep you up in the wee hours. You have to have such a passion for it. And you'll always know, because it comes from way deep inside you. It's not from the head. And then about a year later, I was in research statistics, this course on that. I hate math. And Dr. Pattison said, never research something that doesn't hold you to light the candle in the wee hours when all the electricity has gone out. Never go down that street. This was in research statistics.
Wow.
So underscored the importance, go in that direction. And so at that time, I knew the work of Tom Holmes and Bob Ray, and they were the ones that came up with the life change event scale that listed a bunch of events. They came up with this concept that when you go through enough stress, then within 18 months, if it's not addressed, you end up hospitalized.
Wow.
Things like divorce, death of a family member, but also joyful experiences like Christmas. Well, that's not so joyful for everyone because it means family reunions, which can be very disturbing and get a lot of people into therapy immediately after New Year's. But so he came up with this 300-point system, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And it was related to type A behavior. Redford, in years before that, the way he came up with type A behavior, this sitting on the edge of our chair, ready to pounce on our time to talk, was from a carpet layer. A carpet layer was called into a cardiologist's office and noticed he was asked to repair the rug. Well, the rug repair person said to the cardiologist, what's going on here where the rug is being worn out at the front end of all your chairs? Well, that was curious. This was a cardiologist's office. And it was that type A anxiety of pushing and feeling prompted to produce, achieve. So I had that naming at the time, and I went, okay, type A, I can't just say type A people, because that's too broad a topic, as you know, for dissertation research. So I'll say type A women. And then that transmuted into world weary. Now, I will say to you that my research committee who read the document when I was ready to do my orals, more men than women in it, they all said, not only do I recognize this in women I know, very bright women, I also recognize it in myself. You should do research on world weary men. Well, I'd had enough analysis and respect for my dreams to know that that's not my calling. However, that said, I've had many, many men come for work, the kind like women who are into self-discovery, and they are definitely world weary. Fast forward to today, 2017, I have had more analyses and more consultations for medical referrals and educational referrals and international referrals from people since this last 18 months of elections on the issue of world weariness than ever in my practice.
Wow.
And I've been practicing now moving toward 50 years.
Wow.
People are overwhelmed. So I think that collectively, as a world, we're in such chaos and such turbulence that we are being shoved to the edge of ourselves and how we've known ourselves to be. During Zurich, these threads starting to come together. And as a Jungian analyst, we talk about the red thread in mythology, that each of us has our own way to follow, which comes from the Minotaur myth, which I won't trouble you with. But the gist of it is that if we really listen to our narrative, our dreams, our signs, our symptoms, our synchronicities, what repels us, what attracts us, the story we have written with our life, our ancestors, our ancestral roots, if we really attend that, we will see, circumambulating through that, a specific theme. And that theme is ours to live out by attending our heart's calling to our unlived life. So my oldest client has been 3. My youngest, and my oldest, 92. So we're called at different ages and different stages. Some people get slammed with this confrontation with their world weariness very, very early. And theirs is a crisis of meaning, which developmentally they're not prepared to reach. But some people get it very late. The ones who get it very early feel out of sorts with the world, disappointed with the world, like the world, if the family doesn't have its back, they feel truly alone growing up. And I think that that's why we're seeing so much, not only drug addiction, we're seeing heroin is more common than marijuana. Yeah. We're seeing suicide on the rise. We're seeing so there's this struggle among young people of who am I in this, developmentally way before they should be asking the question. So the ramifications are seriously intense.
Yes, I would have to say that, I have noticed too in my young adult clients more of that crisis of meaning and a sense of despair and hopelessness that is, yes. I don't recall seeing so much in young adult clients.
And it's different from, 40 years ago when I started to work with children and teenagers as well as adults. Their issue then is different from today. In fact, on Tuesday, I'm being interviewed on that topic of which I won't digress today, but the impact of the internet on development in children and what parents need to know and so forth, because it's very definitely having an impact. So they're living in a very different world. And their parents are living in a different world from how they were raised as children. It's the cacophony of this discordant noise that we're having to deal with.
In the second half of our conversation, Dr. Barker goes into depth about the patterns and common themes and experiences she discovered when studying world-weary women. One of these stages she refers to as Bardo. Bardo is a Tibetan word that means literally transitional state or in-between state. In Tibetan Buddhism, it refers to a state of existence between death and rebirth, varying in length according to a person's conduct in life and manner of or age at death. For the purposes of our conversation, it's useful to understand Bardo as a place of transition. You're not in stage 1 or stage 2, but you are in an in-between space, and this in-between space is a very difficult and uncomfortable place to be. Something is dying, something is being born, and this in-between space is a place of not knowing and uncertainty, where the person is feeling the fear, sadness, and accompanying feelings that go when something is dying or ending, and the anticipation of something being born but not knowing what it is. Dr. Barker will also share the examples of dreams of one of the women in her book, a dream that she describes as the dream of our times, and illustrates the experiences or stages that world-weary woman goes through. Finally, Dr. Barker will deepen our understanding of the purpose of the busyness in world-weary woman's life, and will also share the antidote, or what is needed for world-weary woman to heal. So without any further ado, let's return to the interview. So for world weariness in women, what were the overall patterns that you would see in their outer world and also in an inner process that showed you that they were struggling with this experience?
Well, I should say, first of all, the population was self-selected. And that means that they knew I was doing a study and they asked to be interviewed. That's really important. So one of the common denominators, which is so brave, is these were seekers. These were women very successful in their own right, but very much into self-discovery. They wanted to know more. And that takes a lot of guts to do that. So I'd say that is the basic common denominator. Now, since that time, the study I thought would be just during the duration of my dissertation, but it ended up being 10 years, and that was 30 years ago. So I never expected what would happen to happen. So now it's ongoing. So when you say, what's the common theme? I just keep going back to, there's somehow they had a resonance with this. So now it's well over 1,000 women in different cultures, well over that. And I hear the same story wherever I go. In fact, you know what might be very useful to answer your question? I have a website, Cara Barker, CaraBarker.com. Under events was a recent retrospective art show that I did of my art over nearly 70 years. And there's an interview there which talks about the answer to your question, which is that depending on not just the age, but the level of awareness of women who come, they are usually navigating. So stage one is duty to the family, our community, our maybe church or temple, or maybe government, that we feel it's imperative that we address those concerns, and those expectations are made of us. Then we reach a point, Malcolm Gladwell kind of wrote about this in Outliers. He didn't call it stage one, Bardo stage two. Jung called it stage one and stage two. I'm adding Bardo. He said there are people who live on the outskirts of the collective, and they're neither here nor there. I call them in Bardo, where we've come to the edge of ourselves as we've known ourselves to be. We don't know what's coming at all. And that creates a lot of anxiety. It's like an existential soul crisis. Some people call it depression. From where I see it, it's not depression. It's a spiritual crisis. It's the soul is beginning to talk to them. And then they hang out in Bardo for a long time, not knowing. And then stage two comes, which is duty to our own soul. That sounds very linear. In my life, you know, when I laid out all my art, which is hundreds of pieces, I was shocked to see most of my life has been in Bardo. I didn't know that until I laid out my artwork. That's why it's so important to express what can't be done through the linear. We've got to express these images, these dreams, because that's where the red thread is, or the symptoms in our body. We've got to do it. So let me answer your question by giving you what somebody brought through a dream. And the dream is, to me, very archetypal. This was Anna. And Anna, I think she illustrates that the people who come, their issue is they have some kind of recognition they've been using the wrong yardstick on themselves to measure their value and their contribution. So that's a masculine thing. And I'm not a men basher. The masculine, when it's healthy, really serves us beautifully because it's about being the steward to the heart. unfortunately, when it's negative, which is in most women who are in the Amazonian stage of their life, of world weariness, it drives them crazy. So here's the dream of Anna, which is, I think, the dream of our times. I am at work. It is night. The janitor is bringing in baskets and baskets of papers that someone else has handled. All the others have gone home, all the other workers. They are with their families. I am completely alone. The faster I work, the more garbage baskets the custodian brings in, dumping the contents on my desk. Soon there is a mountain of papers completely covering my desk. I look at my watch. It is getting later and later. I am hungry, really hungry. But if I don't finish the work, who will? And how will I get my raise and promotion? In the middle of all this worry, my husband comes into the room. He stands at the doorway and looks at me, smiling. He is radiant. Then he says to me, "You are neglecting what must not be neglected. Gold watches come in many forms." Then I awaken with a fast-beating heart. He is telling me something important. I am worrying about all the wrong things. She has a dream toward the end of the book, which is, it's all in here. Carlos Castaneda coined the word grok. We can kind of grok her growth in that dream, where she's attending to her heart and her masculine logos, which is about how are we to serve the heart. Masculine is not the enemy. And her husband plays that role because her husband, the key is he's radiant. So he's a numinous figure inside her, not just in the outer world, inside her. I mean, she might have had an argument with her husband in the outer world, but in the inner world, he's saying to her, don't miss your life. In my generation, people stayed in the same job forever. And at the end of that, the kudos came literally with a gold watch. In my generation, that all changed. So now people change, well, in my daughter's, what would have been my son's generation, at least 7 times. Now it's more than that. So there's this constant learning curve that we're under, and that feeling of being behind. I did a little sketch one time of this figure behind, and there's this big watch that he's hanging on that says, when's it time for me?
It seems like this
feeling.
Experience of being world weary. It can be motivated from the heart and pursuing what you feel is really your calling, but it can also become a place where you can lose sight of what really matters most to you, or what your values are.
Yes, and I'd say that, while some people come because they're curious, you'll always find where there's some darkness, and I don't mean by darkness it's bad, I mean some secret, hidden pain that they are afraid they're going to drown in the sucker if they ever let themselves touch it. And so the way around it is to stay busy. I remember, Lourdes, after my son was killed, I painted my way through that first year because I obviously couldn't, or to me it was obvious, I couldn't practice until I grew through the shit pile of that experience. And I remember feeling like if I go down into that abyss, what if I never come back? I say I thought, but actually it came through drawings. I would draw and paint because it was too deep for words. The reality is that I never did come back. It's like Osiris. I was so fractured that the job was kind of gathering the shards together into a more ancient and real iteration of my true self. So at that point, when we feel like we're going to tip into the abyss, that's when we get really busy as world weary. All of a sudden, there are pencils to sharp if you're writing a book. All of a sudden, you got to go to the grocery store now because they may run out of that particular kind of squash that you love. Oh, I need to make all these phone calls. I need to get busy, 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 because it's a strategy that the world weary have learned when confronting pain and silent suffering. Get busy fast. Because you see, if you're busy, you can be productive. And if you're productive, then they'll love you. We know how to do that. So if you will allow me, I'd like to read the antidote. Okay, I love Wilhelm Reich. Why? See, I love people that go into the depths. And he lived in China for a while, and he this is a true story, and it so fits today. This is what Wilhelm wrote. There was a great drought where Wilhelm lived. For months, there had not been a drop of rain, and the situation became catastrophic. So this is in China. The Catholics made processions, the Protestants made prayers, and the Chinese burned joss sticks and shot off guns to frighten away the demons of the drought, but with no result. Finally, the Chinese said, "We will fetch the rainmaker." And from another province, a dried-up old man appeared. The only thing he asked for was a quiet little house somewhere, and there he locked himself in for 3 days. Now, he'd traveled miles and miles and miles, and he's very elderly. On the 4th day, the clouds gathered, and there was a great snowstorm at the time of the year when no snow was expected, a very unusual amount. And the town was so full of rumors about the wonderful rainmaker that Wilhelm went to ask the man how he did it. In true European fashion, he said, "They call you the rainmaker. Will you tell me how you made the snow? You know, we want technique. Give us the steps." I wrote for 5 years for the Huffington Post, and when Ariana sold out to AOL, they always wanted the steps. That's so funny to the divine. There aren't any. And then, "They call you the rainmaker. Will you tell me how you made the snow?" And the little Chinese man said, "I did not make the snow. I am not responsible. But what you have done, what have you done during these 3 days? What have you done?" See, doing. "Oh," he said, "I can explain that. I come from another country where things are in order. Here they are out of order. They are not as they should be by the ordinance of heaven. Therefore, the whole country is not in Tao. And I am also not in the natural order of things because I am in a disordered country. So I had to wait for 3 days until I was back in Tao. And then naturally, the rain came." We are in the world out of Tao. We are out of balance and harmony. And so the world weary, in this time of drought for the soul drought, we must sit in quietude, despite the monkey mind that wants us to run around crazy. Sit in quietude and allow the rain to come. In other words, allow the angel's tears, allow the psyche to bathe us, the soul to bathe us, and come into our own. You know, when I'm asked to do retreats, one common denominator is really working with people so that they can begin to honor in the current world the necessity of sitting in quietude to be respectful, to be hospitable to their own sacred suffering. Just be hospitable to it in order to reconnect. The story comes to me. Some stories really speak to me, and this is a very old one of Akiba. And Akiba was a dying man, and very, very old. And when he was on his deathbed, and so his people called for the rabbi. And as the rabbi entered the room, and it was clear that Akiba was really close to his transition, he began to sob. And as the rabbi approached his bed, he said, "Akiba, why are you crying?" And Akiba just cried louder. So the rabbi said, "Akiba, is it your fear of death?" And Akiba shook his hand. And the rabbi said, "Please, please listen. I'm so interested. What is it that frightens you?" And Akiba's tears just rolled down his cheeks, and he waited. He paused and he said, "Rabbi, teacher, All my life, I've tried to live as Moses, and I have woefully failed. And the rabbi said to Akiba, as he respected his tears, he said, "Oh, Akiba, our God will never fault you for not being Moses. All our God cares about is were you Akiba." So the world weary, in my estimation, are sensing through their cancer or their heart attack or their fractious relationship with their partner or the government or politically or whatever brings them to the work or their job stress, they're sensing that this symptom, this sign, this dream, this whatever is so much deeper than the outward appearance. And is it possible that their ladder is against the wrong building? That they're trying to live in accord with something that really has very little to do with them. So how do we live in accord with our own true nature? Because that's what's embedded in us, I mean, if anything, I'd say, whatever we call God, I mean, my calling is to the divine feminine, and I never heard that term growing up. In the Bible, in the Torah, it's called wisdom, capital W. It's seen in Solomon, the book of Solomon. But I was attracted to certain figures. And one day, when my son was about 3, he was playing at the elementary school near our home, and I was sitting beneath the tree there. I'm reading this tiny little book that a student in one of my seminars had given me called The Impersonal Life. Very tiny thing. It's not in print, and the author doesn't claim authorship. But there was a little verse in it that said, "We are made in God's image." And I read that, and I was listening to my son laugh on the slide, and something clicked in me, and I thought, wait a minute, but I'm a woman. I was about 29 at the time, 30 maybe. And I thought, if we're made in God's image, then what if God were also female? In my experience, I mean, it's a false dichotomy to say God is male or God is female. It's the all. It's just that began an inquiry in me. What does that mean for me? Yeah, so it didn't make any sense. It's taken many, many years and much, much work on myself and multiple losses and surgery and all kinds of stuff for me to recognize that each of us has embedded in every cell of our body wisdom and direction. When you start out, and when an embryo starts out, every cell, my husband's a pathologist, and I'm also a nurse practitioner, and every cell is the same. Why does one cell gravitates toward other cells that become the liver and other cells toward what becomes the heart or the intestine? Why? Because each of those cells that gravitate in that direction have a particular function. And without them doing their function in their own way, we can't be a whole human being. Well, we have embedded in us certain proclivities and attractions. We don't know why. We don't know why we're called to certain things. But one of my mentors, Mother Teresa, said, when a woman is tapped by God, she knows it. She may not know what to do with it, but she knows it. And when we're tapped. We don't have a clue what to do with it. Most of us, we're just pedestrians out here trying to, left foot, right foot. But when we're tapped, we know it, and it becomes sometimes an anguishing search to find out what that is. For me, I realized through my own personal experiences and my ancestry and so forth that not by any book or any theology, that the sacred feminine has been shoved aside since 1200. She's been in the shadows, and now she is starting to arise just this week. And I'm not saying this from a political standpoint. Okay, a little bit I am. Elizabeth Warren stands up in our Senate in the United States, and she reads a letter on Black History Month, and that Black to a white person, meaning the shadow, not meaning bad, meaning the unlived life. She stands up and she reads a letter from a woman, the widow of one of our greatest leaders, and she is silent. She's told, go to the principal's office, shut up. But she doesn't. She doesn't fight it out there. She goes outside and she puts it on the internet. She reads the letter. And I think just as compelling, the next day, 3 or 4 male senators get up and read the exact same thing, and they're not silenced. Now, what can we make of that? This is, now to put politics aside, this is a glimmering. It's a, do you have children?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, you know when you were pregnant, the quickening? You
Yeah.
could feel the baby move for the first time. It's just like, whoa, I'm carrying something bigger than me. That was
Yes.
a quickening of the divine feminine. We're called to say, speak up. We don't have to be antagonistic. We don't have to be cruel, but we need to tap into our divine wisdom, and we need to honor it no matter what the case. And here's the beauty of the thing. As a woman gets older and older, she's been a self-seeker. She uses fewer and fewer words because her voice becomes like the rock of Gibraltar. And she says what's so in her heart, and people get it. She has spoken her truth, and that is that. It's not opinionated. It's not like a younger one. It's not like that. It's a quiet knowing, and people get it. And I'll tell you something, people in every culture that I've done retreats in or seminars, whatever, even through translation, and they get what, make a little bit of contact with it. Baby steps are the key to this voice. Baby steps. So I feel very hopeful for the world-weary people. I think, my senses from my dreams, and I had this before 9/11, I had horrific dreams about what would come to pass, and it did. But it always before development in divine consciousness in the human, there's always chaos. There's always turbulence. It's always stormy waters. We are in an apocalyptic time, maybe not, like revelations per se, word by word, but I mean, metaphorically, in our collective psyche and in our personal psyche, we are all in an apocalyptic mode. And we're having to face situations where there are no answers. So we've got to find our sacred ground. And the people who come, going back, circumambulating, it was a term by Dr. Jung. My husband didn't know it before analysis, and he said, you know what you do when you speak? You do what Marianne Woodman does. You lead people around a round building with many windows, but you do get back to it. Now, this drives type A people crazy. I never would have done this in my youth. I've been scared to death. But the world weary come in part because they're all disassociated from their body wisdom, where our deepest cellular knowing is. That's the problem. They've tried to touch the thing that's bothering them through their thoughts. They're trying to figure out what they can do to get themselves out of the jam, but it doesn't work anymore. Their old ways of problem solving will not work. So the reason I study body-centered psychotherapy as well as other things is because it was always clear to me before we ever talked about mind, body, spirit, and in part through the Vietnam soldiers that I attended, it became very clear to me that the body has its own wisdom. And in Western psychology, traditionally, body was one thing, mind's another thing. Spirit, what's a spirit? You can't measure it. We're just coming into, and we are babies in our understanding of consciousness, truly.
So it's almost as if for the world weary, it reminds me of the story you shared about waiting for the rain. That the next step for the world weary is to wait until they are in harmony again, and then the rain will come.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a really current thing. We all have decisions we have to make, going back to that editing out. And recently, I my editor, a year and a half ago, she went through, I had a lot of requests from the Huffington Post from readers to say, could you take and make these into books? Because there's so much in here. And I didn't have time for that. I was attending other things. So this editor came to me and said, could I go through it? This is what's so beautiful about synchronicity. I didn't have to find someone. She found me. She said, could I go through your things because I love your writing? I said, yeah, have at it, but I don't have time to get to it. So a year and a half ago in New Mexico, she met with me and she said, okay, you've got multiple books in here. Here's what I suggest. If you could get on this. And I said, Jamie, I can't because my next commitment for a variety of reasons, it's in the interview on the internet, is to attend to this art show. It's really important for me and my mother's people. That's the divine feminine again. I can't even get to it for probably a year and a half. So I'm now just opening the manuscripts and her remarks. And I get 2 phone calls. One from a man that I love and adore for years, and he asked me to do this internet thing. Wait a minute, 3. Another one from a woman that I worked with years ago as an editor. She's a brilliant writer, and she said, for nearly 20 years I've wanted to co-write a book with you. Would you write a book with me? And I said, it'll have to wait. And then this guy that I don't know, I talked to him for the first time on Friday, and I love him. I love where he's coming from. He said, I want to co-write a book with you. So I'm going, what the heck am I going to do? What the heck am I going to do? Because they're all viable things. I'm interested in all of them. So I've had to sit very quietly for quite a while to know what to do. And what has led me to the answer in the quietude is no. First things first. As tempting as those other things are, my job is my calling that tapped me on the shoulder. And I need to flesh out those manuscripts that have been sitting there because who knows how much time I have. So I must be true to the Great Mother.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
This has been beautiful. And I know that this will resonate with those who are called to listen to it. You know, those who are supposed to hear your words. Thank you so much.
I honor your work so much. You are a blessing like a lantern shining in the forest. We are pillars.
Hi, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Dr. Barker. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be able to have this conversation and to hear her wisdom and insights. There are so many pearls of wisdom that it's very difficult to narrow it down to just a few. But I will start with just a couple of things that grabbed my attention. And one of them was how the busyness, the goal-oriented, achievement-directed behaviors of world-weary women are a coping strategy for dealing with emotional pain. Another aspect that stood out for me is the concept of Bardo. Dr. Barker described Bardo as this in-between place, in between stage 1 and stage 2 of our lives. Stage 1 being the part of our life where the focus is on duty to others, like family, government, church, career. And stage 2 is about the duty to our own souls. And bridging these 2 stages of life is this experience called Bardo, this in-between space of uncertainty and not knowing. So I just found that really compelling. It's something that I have seen in my own life. I see it in the clients I work with, and it just made a lot of sense how Dr. Barker described this experience. For show notes to today's episode, please visit www.lourdesfiato.com/women in depth, where you will also find show notes to today's episode and links to the resources mentioned. And if you are curious about what matters most to you, if you would like to find this out and do inventory or reflection on how your life is reflecting what matters most to you, I invite you to go to my website and sign up for the Life Alignment exercise. And what this exercise will do is just ask you a few simple questions that will help you get thinking about this part of your life. It's very difficult to align our lives with who we are and what matters most to us if we don't know what that is. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.